The question is, we were in the middle of the story of the confrontation between Hagar and the mother of Ishmael and Sarah, the primary wife of Avram Avinu. And last time I think we discussed what happened when Hagar ran away because Sarah afflicted her. And we spoke about the Ramban and the Radak being super critical of Sarah. And we spoke about the defense of Sarah based on the interpretation or explanation of Rabbeinu Hananel, who was one of the Gaonim. And we defended Sarah adequately based on the Shita of Rabbeinu Hananel. Now what happened is Hagar returns home. And she's back in the house. And Sarah then bears a son. Oh, Sarah bears a son. And the little boy is called Yitzchak. And we'll start with Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21 in Bereshit. Now, there's going to be a lot of reading from the text, so if you have access to Chumash, to Genesis, it would be helpful. But I'll read everything and I'll translate everything anyway, or I'll read most of everything. It starts off, then God, Vashem Pokada Sarah, God remembers Sarah, and he does what he promised when the angels visited, and Sarah becomes pregnant and she bears a son to Avraham, and he is called Yitzchak. They call the boy that is born Yitzchak. And Avraham circumcises Yitzchak when he's 8 days old. And Avraham Avinu was 100 years old when Yitzchak was born. And Sarah says, God, it's a laughter. Whoever's going to hear that I gave birth at 100 years of age is going to laugh. Okay. Then in Pasuk Ches, in verse 8, it says, the child grew up. Vayigomel, and he was weaned off of his mother's milk. So he would have either been 2 or 3 or something around 3. Payas, and Avram makes a mishte godol biyomi gomeles Yitzchak. He makes a great party on the day that Yitzchak was weaned off of his mother's milk. The Marshal, who wrote the Yam Shel Shlomo, was a very early Achron, and he writes in his halacha responsa, what is the source of making a party for a bar mitzvah, or even the source for making a party at a wedding, or for even today people make for a bas mitzvah? So what is the source of these parties? The source of these parties is this pasuk, that when Sarah weaned Yitzchak off of her milk, Abraham made a party. Today, we do not make a party for when the mother weans her infant off of her milk, because it's not really tznius, the broadcast when this happens. But basically, there is something else that we do, and that's upsherinish. We do an upsherinish. That means we cut the hair of a boy for the first time after his 3rd birthday, which is around the same time that he would have been weaned off of the milk of his mother if she was nursing. So anyway, that's what happens, and that's what the pasuk says. Anyway, the next pasuk, 9, is where the drama begins. Vatera Sarah ben Hagar hamitzvus asher yolda la'Avraham mitzachek. And Sarah sees the son of Hagar, the Mitzris. Who is that? That's Ishmael. Asher yolda la'Avraham, who he was born to Avraham. In other words, Hagar bore this son to Avraham. Sarah saw him playing. The word mitzachek, playing. The rabbis say Yitzchak was 3 years old, and Ishmael was playing with him. What does it mean, playing with him? Say the rabbis. Ishmael was indoctrinating him on against the 3 cardinal sins. Number 1, you should not murder. He was teaching him to murder. Number 2, he was teaching him to commit adultery. And number 3, he was teaching him to worship idols. This is astounding. How is this to be understood? The child is only 3 years old. How is he going to murder anybody? He's only 3 years old. What is he going to worship idols? What is he going to do when he's 3 years old? He's going to, commit adultery? What is this? What do the rabbis mean by this? So let's just hold that for a moment. Sarah sees this event of Yishmael playing with Yitzchak. Vatomer solo Avram, and Sarah says to Avram, Goresh ha'oma hazos v'yesbena. Drive out this maidservant and her son. Kilo yirash ben ha'oma hazos and beniyim Yitzchak. For this maidservant's son will not inherit together with my son Yitzchak. I want him out of the family. He's not in the line. He's not going to be an inheritor. Vayeira hadavar ma'od b'nei Avraham. And this did not find favor in the eyes of Avram. He was very upset when Sarah said, drive out his son. Alodos beno, because it was his son. Vayomer Elokim el Avram, God tells Abraham, don't let it be bad. Don't let it, don't be upset. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen. And he listens. Vayashkem Avram baboker, and Avram gets up in the morning. He takes a loaf of bread and he takes a canteen of water. He gives it to Hagar and he sends her and the boy out of the family. And they go and wander in the desert by Be'er Sheva. That's basically the story up until the point of the Gerush where Abraham complies with the dictates of Sarah because God commands him to. And they drives Yishmael out of the family. Now let's get back to the question of Mitzachek. What did Sarah see that made her so? Now we'll take one more step back. Until Yitzchak is born, what is Yishmael to Sarah? He's her surrogate son. When she gives Hagar to Avraham to consort with Hagar, she says, I will build a family from whatever child Hagar bears to Avraham. She's my maidservant. Whatever son is born to Hagar, I will adopt, so to speak, not in a legal sense, but in an actual sense. I will adopt him and he will be my son and I will build a family around him. So now all of a sudden, Yitzchak is born. And she drops Yishmael like a ton of bricks. Why? Because she sees him playing with Yitzchak. What does she see? We said before, she sees him trying to convince Yitzchak to do the 3 cardinal sins, and we're astounded by that statement. How could that be? The answer to this question is, she saw that Yishmael, who was knocked off his pedestal, who until the birth of Yitzchak was the heir apparent, until the birth of Yitzchak was considered to be Sarah's own son, surrogate son. All of a sudden, this little baby's born and boom, Yishmael's whole world is disrupted. He's no longer a favorite son. He's no more the heir apparent, or at least not the exclusive heir apparent. He's knocked off of his pedestal. Sarah is now focused completely or entirely on Yitzchak, and Yishmael is left just befuddled and confused. So first of all, if you read this whole chapter 21, which we read the first, somewhere up to, 14 or 15, you will see that Yishmael's name is never mentioned. He is referenced in 3 ways. He is called Ben Omo HaMitzris, the son of the Egyptian maidservant. He's called the Nar, the lad. He's called the Yeled, the boy, the child. Yishmael is already 17 years of age. How do you call him a Yeled? How do you call him a Nar even? What is going on here? The answer is Yishmael. This is Yishmael's self-perception. He's saying to himself, I was once the favored boy in this family. I was the heir apparent. Now I am no longer the heir apparent. I am totally distraught. I am totally befuddled and confused. So therefore, the Torah does not list his name. Because when the Torah states a person's name, that reflects the person's essence. That's a reflection of his essence. At the moment, that is his essence. That stands for him. That represents his self, his absolute essence. What the Torah is telling us here is Yishmael is not present, meaning he's not cognitively, emotionally present. Why is he not in that position? Because he's confused by the abrupt change in his status. And we'll see how this plays out later. So what does Ishmael do in the midst of this confusion where he's knocked off his pedestal? He says, there's only one thing I can do. I've got to bring down the spirituality of Yitzchak, this little boy. I have to contaminate him. I have to mentor him to do the most terrible things. What does that mean? It means I must make sure, the only way I can draw even now, the only way I can gain some equality with Yitzchak, who superseded me in the family dynamic, is to make sure that he does not grow up to be a spiritual person like Avram Avinu. And if I can despoil and dismantle or destroy his spirituality, I will gain parity with him. And that's what the Chazal are telling us. It's not that Ishmael was trying to convince Yitzchak to commit adultery when he's 3 years old. It was that Ishmael was committed to teaching his younger brother, for every older brother has great influence on the younger brothers. He's trying to teach him and mentor him to be spiritually debased, so he, Ishmael, can assume equality with him, or maybe even surpass him once again. So now Sarah sees this, and she perceives immediately what Ishmael's intention is. And so therefore she says to Avraham Avinu, drive out this son from the family. Now, a modern person might think, why doesn't Avraham call in Ishmael, or together with Sarah, call in Ishmael and say, listen here, son, you cannot do this. You cannot destroy Yitzchak's spirituality. If you do this, we're going to throw you out. There's no warning given to Ishmael. He's immediately banished from the family. Why is there no warning given to him? Because Sarah perceived, and God agreed with her perception, that Ishmael could not change. He could not get over that the fact that he was no longer the son, in the dynamics of the family, he was no longer the heir apparent. And as a result, she knew that no matter what we would say to Ishmael, it would not help. And God agrees with her. God certainly knows he's a bochein levavos. He knows what is working in Ishmael's mind, and he agrees with Sarah's assessment that Ishmael will not be able to comport his behavior, and he is bent on destroying the spirituality of Yitzchak. And therefore, without any warning, without any musa shmuz, without any rebuke, without any ability for Ishmael to deal with this issue, they banish him from the family by the word of God. Now, and Sarah, of course, Sarah initiates it. So what does Avram Avinu do? Vayashkem, pick up in verse 14. Vayashkem Avraham baboker. Remember, Avraham is really upset by what he's being commanded by God to do. Vayeira hadover. It's wrong in the eyes of Avraham, but he can't do anything because God told him to do it. Avram gets up in the morning and he takes a loaf of bread and a canteen of water. He gives it to Hagar, puts it on her shoulder together with her son, and he sends them out of the family. Now, there comes another time when Abraham will send away some of his children. After Sarah dies, Yitzchak goes and brings Keturah to Abraham for a wife. Our rabbis tell us that Keturah was none other than Hagar. So while Hagar is being driven out of the family now by the word of Sarah, after Sarah dies, Yitzchak goes to bring Hagar back to Avram Avinu. Just as Avram Avinu was sending Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak, so too Yitzchak is looking for a wife for Avram, and he brings back Keturah. After Avraham Avinu accepts Keturah in the household, she bears him 12 sons. And these 12 sons are sent away to Eretz Kedem, to the lands of the east. When Abraham sends these, because he does not want them to inherit with Yitzchak. So when Abraham sends them away, it says in the Torah, he gives them kol tov, he gives them all kinds of goodies. He gives them camels, he gives them chveis, I don't know what else, he gives them food, he gives them probably money, or whatever it was the equal of money in those days. He gave them enough so that they could establish themselves in another community far away from where Avraham Avinu lived. Why doesn't he do the same for Ishmael? Why does he give him a canteen and a loaf of bread? In my mind, the answer to that question is because Avram Avinu wanted Ishmael to come back. Now, God commanded him to banish Ishmael, to ask him to leave, which he did, but he gave him provisions that might last him for a day or two in the desert. And he was hoping that Ishmael would say to himself, to his mother, let's go back. He's 17. Let's go back and let's ask for forgiveness. Let's pledge to Avram Avinu we won't do this anymore. Let's reverse our policy, my policy. And I will live with Yitzchak and I will not try to despoil him. That's what Avram Avinu was hoping. Therefore, he gave him meager provisions. But Ishmael had extreme pride. And although he almost came to death, he's saved and he does not go back home. He does not, let's call it, crawl back to Avram Avinu and beg for forgiveness. He remains adamant and pride. He's full of pride and he will not return. So now, this is hard for us to understand. Why would this happen in one day, basically? What's amazing is I think we discussed this. I don't know if we discussed this last time, but we'll discuss it this time. Avram Avinu lived in the same time as Hammurabi. Did I ever discuss that with you? Silencio. Nobody remembers?
Rabbi.
What?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good. So now Amraphel, who is Hammurabi, lived in the same time as Avram Avinu, and Hammurabi adopted a code of law. This code of law Avram Avinu was bound by this code of law. Why? Because he was a Ben Noach. He was not Jewish in the sense that we know today. He was born as a member of Terach's family. He didn't undergo a conversion. There was no Bezdin. There was no Rabbanut. He was basically a Ben Noach, and all of the nation of Israel underwent a process of conversion at Har Sinai when they accepted the Torah, and there was a korban, and they entered into a bris, a covenant with God. That's when Am Yisrael was formed. So at this point in time, while as Avraham Avinu voluntarily adopted certain moral and maybe even halachic dinim, he was doing it as a volunteer, on a voluntary basis. He was not bound by that because he was not yet Jewish. He never became Jewish. He was always a Ben Noach. As a Ben Noach, he was obligated to follow the code of Hammurabi because one of the seven mitzvahs that was given to the general world population was to fulfill the 7 Noahide laws. One of the 7 Noahide laws is dinim, to adopt a civil legislation that would govern the behavior of society. So Hammurabi's code fit into that category. It was a code to govern civilization, at least all of the territory that Hammurabi was sovereign over. And Avram Avinu lived in the Mesopotamian Pale where Hammurabi was sovereign. So Avram Avinu is subject to fulfilling the code of Hammurabi because that's part of dinim, his obligation as a Ben Noach to follow the 7 Noahide laws. So what is amazing about this is, let's read from section 170 and section 171 from the Code of Hammurabi, which I was introduced to this by a sefer written by Rabbi Elchanan Samet, who lives in the Gush, who is a brilliant parshan. You know what a parshan is? He's a brilliant explainer of the text of the Torah and of the Tanakh. Anyway, he brings both of these sections, section 170 and section 171, in Hebrew, and he quotes the interpreter who interpreted it from Akkadian. His name was Yosef Fleischman, a scholar named Yosef Fleischman, and interpreted the Code of Hammurabi into Lashon, into Ivrit. And this is what it says in Sif 170, section 170 of the code. By the way, When I saw this, it blew my mind, and hopefully it'll astound you too. So I went immediately to the internet. I looked up the Code of Hammurabi, and lo and behold, this is what it says. Because now the Code of Hammurabi has been translated into English. So maybe Fleischman interpreted from English into Hebrew, or maybe he knew somehow Akkadian. Anyway, Im ishto haroshis shel odam yoldo lo banim. It's talking about now where a man has married to a wife for many years and has no child. So what does he do? He takes in his maidservant, and his maidservant as a surrogate wife, so to speak, and the surrogate wife bears him a son. That's the premise that opens up 170. Then it says, what happens if after the surrogate wife produces an heir, im ishto harashis, or Horatius, his first wife, the main wife, also bears him a son. In this case, Sarah bears Yitzchak. And the maidservant had already bore him a son. So now the father is faced with two children, one from his primary wife and one from his surrogate wife. Va'av ba'odo b'chayim, and the father, in this case, is still alive, so Avram Avinu is still alive. Va'omer la yelodim, and he says to the children of the maidservant, the surrogate wife, Atem yoladai, you are my children. I recognize you as full-fledged children. And he counts them among his children, together with the son of the primary wife. So he counts Ishmael as his son, together with Yitzchak. Now, Acharei Shav Holech Legorolo, after he passes away, what happens? The children of his primary wife, together with the children of his surrogate wife, share in his estate equally. The only advantage given to the children of the primary wife is they get to choose which half, 50% that they want, and the other 50% is left for Ishmael in this case. Then it says in 171, what happens if the father, while he's alive, doesn't want the child of the maidservant to be treated as a son after he dies? He doesn't want the son of the maidservant, in this case, he does not want Ishmael to inherit. Then they do not get to share in the assets of the father when the father dies. What happens? He has to assure that the maidservant is set free. She's no longer to be a maidservant. And her sons cannot be, Yitzchak could not demand that Ishmael be his servant. The father has to send away the mother, the surrogate mother. He has to send or set free the child, Ishmael, and they have to leave the family, and they become free people, no longer maidservant, no longer son of a maidservant. They become free, and they are independent of the father and independent now of the son, who is the heir apparent, or is going to be the heir. If you listen to this code, and you say to yourself that Avram Avinu is, subject to this code, must comply with its laws, you can see clearly why Sarah says, I don't want this boy Ishmael to inherit with my son. And if that's the case, you must free him. Goresh Esa'ama, you must set her free, just like a husband must set free a wife under circumstances of a get. You must set her free, and he must leave the family. And so what's happening here is Avram Avinu is satisfying the terms of the Code of Hammurabi once it was determined that Ishmael should not be an heir of his estate. Lo yirash ben ha'oma hazos and beniyim Yitzchak. Sarah says, under no circumstances can Ishmael inherit any part of your estate, any part of our estate, if you want to say was, together they built it. No, Ishmael is not an heir. Set him free. And of course, Avram Avinu sets him free. But as I said before, it was very, very in poor taste in the eyes of Avram Avinu to do this. And so he only gave him a canteen and a loaf of bread in the hopes that he would return. But he doesn't return. And that's basically this story in terms of its effect on the family dynamic, on Avraham, and on Yitzchak. The Torah goes on to say that the water in the canteen depletes. It's finished. They drink the water. And now Ishmael is suffering from sunstroke. And Hagar has no water to give him. So what does she do? Look in Pasuk Tez Zayin, which is 16. Vayichlu hamayim min hachemes. No, I'm sorry, it's 15. Vayichlu hamayim min hachemes, and the water depletes from the canteen. Vatashleches al yeled, and now Yishmael is dying of dehydration, of sunstroke. Vatashleches hayeled tachas achas hasifin, and she throws him, or she puts him under a bush. And then she distances herself. She goes away from him. She distances herself from her son who's dying. And she goes away the distance of a shot of an arrow. I don't know, 200 feet away. And she sits down and cries. Now this Parsha, which is part of Parashat Vayeira, is read on Shabbos when it becomes its turn in the sequence of the Parshios. And attached to this Parsha is the Haftorah of the woman of Shunem. There was a great woman in Shunem, that's a town or a village in Israel, and Elisha Hanavi, who was the heir successor to Eliyahu Hanavi, that followed after Eliyahu. He was the student of Eliyahu Hanavi. And when he became the Navi, he decided to ride the circuit, meaning he decided to go around the country from village and town, city, village, town, from one to the other, mentoring the people, teaching them Torah, giving them the word of God. And that's what he did. He used to pass through Shunem frequently. And when the woman of Shunem saw that Elisha was coming frequently, she said to her husband, Nasalo, we should make for him kir katana, we should make for him a little, what's called hole in the wall, a little apartment. And we'll put there a bed, we'll put there a chair, we'll put there a candelabra, and we'll invite him to eat with us. And there we have a bedroom. We made up a makeshift bedroom, not a makeshift, but a bedroom for him to sleep in. And Elisha comes and does this, and he's very happy that she did this for him. And he asks her, what can I do for you? First he thought, should I intervene with the king? Should I intervene with the generals? Should I intervene with the politicians? What should I do for you? And he was told by his by his valet or his student, Gehazi, the woman has no children. And so Elisha blesses her to have a child. The child grows up. This is over a process for years. The child grows up. And one day, the father takes his son into the fields to harvest. And the boy gets struck by sunstroke, and he collapses. And the father tells his servants, take him to his mother. And they pick up the child, and they bring him to his mother, the great woman of Shunem. And she's holding him in her lap. It says, Ad ashelon nosra bo neshama, until he stops breathing. And he's dead, basically. And she holds him and holds him. And once she sees he's dead, she takes him and carries him up to Elisha's room. And she puts him on Elisha's bed, and she goes and she begs Elisha to come back with her, and Elisha ultimately resurrects the child. Well, what is one of the reasons that this Haftorah is connected to this Parsha is not because the child suffered from sunstroke. The reason is to contrast the difference between a Jewish mother and a Muslim mother, because Hagar is Ishmael's mother. Ishmael is supposedly the father of the Islamic world. What is the difference between a Jewish mother and an Islamic mother? The Jewish mother who has a child who's dying from sunstroke holds him, cuddles him, nurtures him until the very last moment, until he no longer is alive. A Muslim mother puts the child 200 feet away, cries, but doesn't give him comfort. Why? Because she says, Al era b'mos hayelet. I cannot stand to see my son die. It's too painful for me. because my son represents my legacy. My son is something that will live on beyond me. He's my contribution. If he's no longer going to live beyond me, then all he is a source of pain to me. I don't want to suffer this pain. And she distances herself from the child. A Muslim mother can send her son on a suicide mission and celebrate when he blows himself up with others, especially Jews. Why? Because he serves a purpose for her. It's not an unconditional love. A Jewish mother has unconditional love for her child and will not put him under a bush and go away and so she doesn't see him die. She will hold him and nurture him and give him comfort to the best of her ability until the very last breath. And that's why this Haftorah is read when this Parsha is read in the shul on Shabbos. We read the Haftorah, and this has great significance to what we are seeing, unfortunately, today. They will destroy themselves if they can just kill Jews, because that's their purpose. That's their covenant. That's what they believe in. They're sick, demented murderers, and therefore they can part with their children, with their young adults, with their teenagers, and even their men in order to kill Jews, because their lives mean nothing to them in terms of spirituality. It's all a hoax that they have deep religious belief. Their religion is so perverted and corrupted that it's to me, it's a chilul Hashem that they even say they believe in God. But anyway, that is what we see from this Parsha. The way Hagar treated her son, and the way Yitzchak, the way the Isha Shunamis treats her son. Okay, so now we understand, why does God listen to the cry of this boy? It says, Vayikra, okay, Hashem listens to the cry of the child. Let me find the pasuk. Vayishma, pasuk 17. Vayishma Elokim al kol hanar. And God hears the cry of the child. He's sitting under some bush 200 feet away from his mother. He's crying, she's crying. God listens to his voice, and he summons as an angel to reveal to Hagar the location of a well of fresh water. And that revives Ishmael. There's a big question here that is asked by many. It says, Vayishma Elokim al kol hanar. God hears the voice of the child. So the Midrash says to us, the Malachim complain to God, why are you listening to the voice of this child? After all, his children are destined to afflict your children, to kill your children, to torment them, to do what they're doing today. Why did you save Ishmael? Why not just let him die? So the answer is given that God listens to the voice of the child as he was crying at that moment. When God judges us, he doesn't look to what we're going to do next year. He looks to how we are sincere, begging him for forgiveness on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and he listens to our voice of the moment. And he doesn't look into the future to see if we're going to stand by our commitments not to sin in the future. He doesn't look that way. He looks only at the present. If that's the case, how come the wayward son is judged over what he's going to do? So now we have to just stop a moment and talk about the laws of the wayward son. The wayward son is a boy who grows up in a family, and when he's 13, he begins to suffer from addictions. He's basically an alcoholic, and he's a glutton for food. And so he drinks a certain amount of alcohol because he's addicted to alcohol, and he eats a tremendous amount of meat, and he depletes the assets of his parents. He goes through their assets, which we understand today. Children deplete the assets of their parents by stealing from their parents monies that they can use to buy drugs. So they're addicted to the drugs and they deplete the assets of their parents. This is a case of the wayward son who depletes the assets of his parents, and then he begins to steal. He becomes a highwayman, and he stands on Parashat Vayeira on the highway, and whoever passes by, he robs, or he selects victims to rob. And the Gemara says there'll come a time when someone who will want to defend his assets and will oppose this young highwayman, and they'll get into a scuffle, and the highwayman will kill the innocent owner of these possessions that he seeks to steal. So the Gemara says, the wayward son is now to be brought to justice. The justice is that he will be killed. The Beis Din will execute him, because in the future, he's going to become a highwayman, and he's going to, in the future, kill somebody. So the question is, if the standard is to look at what the child or what the person does now, Basher Hu Sham, as he is then, how does the Torah tell us that we're going to look into the future and determine that this person's going to be a murderer? Basher Hu Sham, right now, he's not a murderer. Why do we put him to death? Al Shem Sofo, as to what he's going to be. Why don't we judge him as to what he is right now? Put him in jail, send him to some drug rehabilitation, alcohol and drug rehabilitation program. Why are we killing him now? Because later on he'll become a murderer. It doesn't jive with the story of Ishmael. So to answer this question, I have a Talmud Chacham friend who happens to be the Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva in Miami Beach, Florida, whose name is Rabbi Yochanan Zwei, he should be well. And he developed a tremendous answer to this question. But to understand his answer, we need to further delve into the laws of the wayward son. The Gemara says that a wayward son has a window, meaning the only way a person or a young man can be judged as a wayward son is if he's 13 years of age, because if he's not yet 13, he's not judged by any court, a human court. And as a result, we're talking about a child or a teenager who reaches 13 years of age. The window is for 3 months. When he reaches 13 years of age and 3 months, he can no longer be deemed or judged to be a wayward son. Why, says the Gemara? Why is there only this 3-month window of opportunity? The answer is because when he's 13, he could conceivably impregnate a woman. And after 3 months, it will become obvious that she's pregnant. Once it's obvious that she's pregnant, he's no longer a son. He moves up to the status of a father, or at least a potential father. He's no longer deemed a son. He's now going to be deemed a potential father. If he's a potential father, he's not a wayward son anymore. So the window of opportunity for someone to be convicted as a wayward son is 3 months. That's one restriction. Then the Gemara says, the Pasuk says in the Chumash, the text says, V'safsu also avivimo, his mother and his father must grab a hold of this wayward son and bring him to court. So what does it say? V'safsu also. They have to grab a hold of him. What is it? So the Gemara says, what happens if they have a lame arm? If the father cannot grab him with 2 arms, he only has 1 functioning arm. It's not a ben Sora Mora. The father must be able to grasp him with both arms. And then the Gemara says, V'hotzio also. They have to grab him and then take him to court. What happens if the father is lame in 1 leg? Or for sure, if he's lame in 2 legs, he can't carry him out. He can't take him to court. So if the father is lame in 1 of his legs, no ben Sora Mora. Now, what happens if there's discord in the family? And the mother says this to the son, and the father communicates a different message to the son, and they're in disagreement how to deal with this wayward son. They have to come to the court and say, Enenu shomea b'kolenu. This child, our son, does not listen to us. We've lost control over this son. Says the Gemara, if there's dissidence and if there's dissent in the manner of upbringing of this child, if the father and the mother don't agree, no ben Sora Mora. They must agree. They must speak with one voice. If they don't speak with one voice, no ben Sora Mora. So now we are beginning to understand. There's a short window of opportunity. Their father has to be in full possession of both his hands and his feet. And there has to be no dissent in the family. Any of those things will disqualify this person from ever being judged by a court to be a ben Sora Mora. So Rabbi Zweig asks, Why are all these restrictions raised to this din? So the Gemara says, Ben Sora Amor Lo Hoya V'Lo Yeh. There never was a case of Ben Sora in the history of Am Yisrael, and there never will be a case of a wayward son in the history of Am Yisrael. So how do we know it never will be, it never was? Most people understand that to mean because parents will not turn on their son and turn him in to be killed. But it's also that the Gemara is setting up so many restrictions and preventions and impediments that it's very hard to find a family that raises a wayward son that speaks with one voice. Because ultimately the son plays the mother against the father and the father against the mother, and he sows discord in the family. And if that happens, there'll be no Ben Sora more. So therefore, it's impossible to happen. So now we understand there's no contradiction between the case of Ishmael, who's judged as he is now, and the case of the Ben Sora Amora, who's judged also on the case of he is now. Because what is the problem with the Ben Sora Amora? Ultimately, he destroys the family. Not only is there dissent between the father and mother, but he destroys the family because he depletes the family from all of its assets. He makes the family destitute. So not only is the family destitute because he wants the family's assets to serve as addictions, he makes them destitute. He sows discord. He destroys the family unit. In Jewish life and really in all of civilization, the family is the basic unit of civilization. In fact, the Torah tells us the command to learn Torah and to teach Torah is a transmission from father to son. Vishinamtam livonecha, you teach your son, v'dibarta bam, and you speak in the words of Torah. Without a family unit, there's really no transmission of Torah. Certainly without a mother to give emotional strength to the child and to build up, the moral stature of the boy, of the girl, of the child. Without a mother's input, without a father's input, there's no civilization, there's no Jewish civilization, there's no Jewish family, there's no Jewish continuity. And so just like the case of a homosexual, which is also a capital offense against Judaism. Why? Because it destroys the ability to propagate. Because up until modern medical technology, you could not propagate from a union of two males or two females. So therefore, the union of two males was considered an attack on civilization and became a capital offense. The same thing of Ben Sora Mora, who destroys the family unit, the basic unit of civilization. He's going against Yeshuvo Shalolam, and therefore he too has to be put to death. So just like God judges Ishmael as he is then, God is judging the Ben Sora Amora, the wayward child, as he is then. Then he has destroyed the family unit. Then he is guilty of a capital offense. Okay. So that's what we learn out from the Pasuk Ba'asher Husham, which is a very, very fundamental lesson for the laws of tshuva, that God does not look to see what we're going to do next year. If we are sincere, now this means we have to be sincere. We have to take steps to prevent further sinning, and we confess our past sins, and we have a serious commitment, which we try our best not to repeat the sin. That is a tshuva that God will accept on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, and we will attain kapara, we will attain tshuva, repentance.
Excuse me.
This is another. Any questions?
Yes. I have
Sure,
a question.
shoot.
Okay, which Gemara has all the rules about the Masorah Ben
Gemara in Sanhedrin.
Sanhedrin?
Towards the end of Sanhedrin.
Okay.
Lists all the laws of the Ben Sora Mora. I don't remember the exact page, but if you want, I can find you the exact page. But
okay, and then can you just say your conclusion again, that Ishmael is listened to at the time? Okay,
that's right. He's judged at the moment.
Right.
He's judged for his moment. At that moment, he's crying out to God.
Right. And the wayward son, you said, is also judged.
Also going to be judged for his actions of the moment. What are his actions of the moment? the destruction of the family unit, which is the fundamental unit of civilization, of Jewish civilization, as well as secular civilization, which is one of the problems that both the Jewish world and the secular world is undergoing. The family unit is being destroyed before our eyes, and therefore civilization is becoming more and more corrupt. And Judaism, and even amongst our own people, we are suffering the consequences of the disintegration of the family. But that is an attack on Yeshuvo Shalom. That is attack on the continuity of the world. So the Ben Sora Morar is guilty because of his present attack on the continuity of the world, the destruction of the Jewish family.
But we don't punish him. We don't.
And therefore we punish him.
There's too many impediments. We don't kill him.
Well, I was trying to tell you that it will never happen because parents will not turn their son in. And because even if they would turn their son in, there's these other impediments. And the most primary impediment is they have to speak to him with one voice, which we know. Unfortunately, we know that many homes that suffer a problem child, the mother thinks we should do one thing, the father thinks we should do everything. Let's say the father thinks tough love and the mother can't give tough love. So there's a confusion of the message that's directed to the boy. And as a result, he's befuddled in his own mind, and he slips into this mode of being a wayward son. So therefore, we're not going to judge him as a wayward son because it's a terrible, terrible result. Notwithstanding the fact that he has assaulted our basic form of civilization, the rabbis tell us the dynamic of mothers and fathers will be such that they will not be able to bring him to justice, either because they don't want to, or because they communicated a different message to him, and therefore it will never happen. But the theory of it, the basis of why we would do this, if all the pieces fell in place, is because it's an assault on the family unit, not something that's going to happen in the future, something that's taking place right now. Did I help you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think we have finished this story. And it has, obviously, like I said, grave, grave significance for us. We have to be very careful to guard family life in Judaism, for that is the methodology of transmission of the values of the Torah. The emotional, spiritual values of the Torah are best transmitted by family, by parents. And we have learned about Basher Husham, that God judges a person as he is at the moment, as long as it's sincere. We also learned about the difference between a Muslim mother and a Jewish mother, whereas a Jewish mother will always nurture her child until the very end, whereas a Muslim mother, who's only interested in her gain out of this child, and when her gain is no longer valid, or she has another gain that she thinks is more important, she'll sacrifice that child to that gain. And that's the difference between a mother who can raise suicide bombers versus a mother who will not ever raise suicide mothers, a Jewish mother. We also talked about the lesson that we learned from this little parsha, that Ishmael was not cognizant of himself. His essence was not there because he was totally distraught and confused by his being knocked off the pedestal. And therefore, again, he's not considered to be blamed for what he did. And that's why the Torah does not identify his name. And finally, we also spoke about the Marshal, who says that when we make a bar mitzvah or a bas mitzvah or a sheva brachas or a chasana, and we make a big meal, it's because we learn from Avrum Avinu that when there is a milestone in the life of your child or the life of your family, you celebrate it with a mishteh gadol, a big party. Now, you also, if I want to comment here a little bit, is to tell you that it's gotten totally out of hand in many circles. The parties are becoming terrible burdens on parents. They can't keep up with the Joneses. They can't equal the party of their neighbor who has more assets than, who is wealthier than them. And it's a destructive factor that's, we have the ability, our people, to turn a mitzvah into something destructive. And this is one case where we have turned a mitzvah of making a celebratory party to thank Hashem. We now make it a celebratory party to advertise our aggrandizement, our wealth. It's no longer a party to thank Hashem and celebrate with our family and our friends. It's now a party to show off to our friends and talk about our wealth or display our abilities. And of course, this catches people who can't keep up with the Joneses in a terrible vice, and they get crushed financially by this. So we have to be careful. In all of these areas, we need to learn the lesson of that chapter 21 that we read today. And I could start the next section, but I think we'll just stop here because the next section will also have two parts. It's a very complex issue, but I'll tell you the main question that we will address Emir Hashem in our next session. How in the world did Yitzchak, our patriarchal father, want to bless Esav over Yaakov? Now, we can't say that he was old and he couldn't see anymore, because this story of the stealing of the blessings, which we will talk about, takes place when these children, Esav and Yaakov, are in their 60s. So Yitzchak has raised them for 60 years, from their birth to this point in the story. How do we understand that he cannot distinguish in a period of 60 years between the essence of the goodness of Yaakov and the essence of the rishus, the not just the cruelty, but the rishus? How do we say rishus? The evil of Esav. How can he not distinguish between his two sons at 60 years of age? And he's a prophet. How do you fool a prophet? How do you fool a prophet? So there's these suggested silly questions. Can you give a tithing on salt? Yosef comes to Yitzchak and says, can you tithe salt? So Yitzchak says, oh, what a tzaddik. What kind of crazy question is that? I mean, that's how you fool a prophet? That's how you fool a patriarch? That's how you fool a father of our nation? How could he have made such a blunder and intend to bless Esav, the evil one, over Yaakov, the poor, simple, proper son? That's what we'll discuss next week. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week. If not in person, then by Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
I want to thank the Chabad for making this all available to us. Have a good week. Let the learning that we do today and the learning that we do every day be a zechus, a merit for our brave soldiers who are fighting the war. They're lochem milchemes Hashem. They're fighting the war of God. Ba'ad Armenu for our people. Ba'ad Artseinu for the land. Ba'ad Orei Eloheinu for the cities of our God. As that's when Yoav, the Sartzavah of David, went into war, that's what he would say to his soldiers. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for our people, for our land, and for our cities. And they are fighting for us with Mesiras Nefesh. And the Torah will support them and help them. And let's hope that Hashem somehow guides their officers to take the right route to reach these murderers and kill them, and that they don't suffer terrible consequences or suffer great losses. Mirz Hashem, the schus of our Torah should protect them, and their Mesiras Nefesh, their willing to risk their lives for us, is also a tremendous point of strength. And let Hashem bless them with success, with victory, and with achievement. Have a good week.